Have you ever seen someone standing at your door long after the trick-or-treaters should have left? Someone who doesn't move, even when you turn off the lights? It was late, well past 10 p.m., and I was about to shut off the porch light. The stream of trick-or-treaters had slowed down, and I figured the night was finally over. I stood at the window, scanning the empty street, when I noticed someone standing at the end of my driveway. It wasn't a kid. The figure was tall, dressed in an old-fashioned long black coat. At first, I thought it was some straggler, maybe an older teen trying to be creepy. But something about the way they stood there, motionless, watching, made my skin crawl. They didn't move. They just stood, perfectly still at the edge of the light. I waited for them to approach, to come up the steps like all the other kids had. But they didn't. After a few minutes, I started feeling uneasy. I turned off the porch light, thinking they'd get the message and leave. But they didn't leave. They just stood there, a black shape against the dark. I told myself it was just a prank, someone playing a Halloween joke. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I locked the door, double-checking it, and tried to go back to watching TV. But every few minutes, I'd glance at the window, expecting to see them again. And then I heard the knock. 3 sharp knocks on the front door. My heart raced as I approached the door, cautious. I looked through the peephole, expecting the figure. But there was no one there. The porch was empty. Still, I felt the weight of someone's presence lingering, like they were just out of sight, watching me from the shadows. When I opened the door to check, my porch was completely empty, except for a small object left on the welcome mat. A crumpled piece of paper. My hands shook as I unfolded it. It was an old photograph, black and white, the edges yellowed with time. It was my house, taken from the front yard. But something was off. In the photo, standing by the front door, was a man in a long black coat, looking directly at the camera. My breath caught. The man in the photograph was in the exact spot I was standing now, at the front door. I looked back at the street. The figure was gone. But as I stepped back into the house, a chill ran down my spine. The photograph, the man wasn't looking at the camera anymore. He was looking at me.
Have you ever gone to a Halloween corn maze? The kind where you get lost for a few minutes but always find your way out? What if you didn't? It was supposed to be a fun night. Me and 3 friends decided to check out the local Halloween corn maze, one of those seasonal setups where they throw in a few actors to jump out at you. We'd done it before, so we didn't think much of it. But this time, things felt different. As soon as we entered the maze, the atmosphere was strange. The air was colder than usual, a thick fog hanging low over the cornstalks. We laughed it off at first, joking about how creepy it felt. But as we walked deeper into the maze, the laughter faded. The paths seemed wrong. After half an hour, we realised we hadn't run into a single actor. No cheap jump scares, no sound effects, nothing. Just the endless twisting paths, with no sense of direction. The further we went, the quieter it got. No wind, no voices from other people in the maze, just the sound of our own footsteps crunching on the dirt. That's when we saw the figure. At first, we thought it was part of the attraction, someone in costume wearing a long hooded robe. But the figure didn't move. It just stood at the end of one of the paths, completely still. We called out, waved, expecting them to jump out at us, but nothing happened. The figure just stood there, its face hidden in the shadow of the hood. We decided to turn back and take another path, but as we turned the corner, the figure was there again, standing at the next intersection. Always ahead of us, always watching. That's when the panic set in. We tried retracing our steps, but the paths seemed to have changed. The cornstalks shifted like they were closing in around us. Every time we thought we were making progress, we ended up in the same spot, facing the same hooded figure, unmoving, just watching. My friends and I got separated at some point, yelling for each other as we stumbled through the maze. I could hear their voices, but they sounded distant, as if the maze was swallowing the sound. The fog thickened, and soon I was completely alone. The figure was still there, closer now. I couldn't see their face, but I could feel their gaze. My heart pounded as I ran, desperate to find the exit, but no matter which way I turned, the figure was always ahead of me. Finally, I broke through the corn, collapsing onto the empty field beyond the maze. My friends were already there, pale and shaken. We didn't say anything at first, just stared back at the maze. Trying to understand what had happened, when we returned to town, we asked around about the maze, thinking it was some kind of elaborate prank. But the response we got chilled me to the core. The maze had been shut down earlier that night, before we even entered. So who or what had been inside with us?
Have you ever knocked on the wrong door by accident? Most people apologize and walk away. But what if the door opened before you even touched it? It was Halloween night, and I was walking back from a friend's party, cutting through the neighborhood streets. It was a cool, quiet night, one of those where every sound seemed to carry in the crisp air. The streetlights flickered as I passed, casting long, eerie shadows across the sidewalk. The last of the trick-or-treaters had gone home, leaving the streets empty, save for a few houses still decorated with pumpkins and fake cobwebs. As I walked, I realized something. My phone was dead, and I had no idea where I was. The houses here were unfamiliar. All of them looked similar, darkened windows and dimly lit porches blending into the night. I figured I'd knock on a door and ask for directions back to the main road. Nothing unusual. I spotted a house at the end of the block with a faint light still glowing through the curtains. The porch light flickered as I approached, but I chalked it up to the old wiring. The house was slightly run down, but I wasn't picky at that point. I just wanted to get home. As I reached out to knock, the door creaked open. I froze. I hadn't even touched the handle yet. "Hello?" I called softly. No answer. I hesitated, peering inside. The hallway was dimly lit, and I could just make out a shadowy figure standing at the far end of the hall. It was hard to tell who or what it was, but the figure seemed to be facing me, though it wasn't moving. My first instinct was to leave, but something about the stillness of the figure, the way it seemed to be waiting, unnerved me. "Sorry, wrong house," I said quickly, stepping back. The figure didn't respond. It didn't move at all. I turned and walked away, trying to shake the strange feeling creeping up my spine. But as I reached the edge of the lawn, I heard it, the soft creak of a floorboard behind me. I glanced over my shoulder, and the door was wide open now. The figure was gone. My breath quickened as I hurried down the street. The night suddenly felt colder, and the houses seemed darker, more distant. Every time I looked back, I expected to see someone following me, but the street remained empty. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, matching my pace, but they weren't coming from behind me. They were coming from ahead. I stopped, heart pounding, scanning the street. There was no one there. The footsteps stopped too. I started walking again, faster this time, glancing nervously over my shoulder. But the sound returned just as before. One step for every step I took. I broke into a jog, my eyes darting around for any sign of life. The houses were all dark now, as if the entire street had fallen asleep in an instant. The footsteps kept pace, echoing in my ears. And then, just ahead of me, I saw it. The same house, the same flickering porch light, the same open door. I had somehow come back to where I started. I stopped in my tracks, my mind spinning. This didn't make sense. I had walked in a straight line, I was sure of it. There was no way I could have circled back. The door, still open, seemed to beckon me, and then I saw it again, the figure standing in the hallway. This time, it was closer, its shape clearer in the dim light. I backed away, my hands trembling, my legs barely able to move. I turned and ran, not caring where I was going, as long as it was away from that house. But no matter how far I went, how many streets I turned down, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that someone or something was following me. Finally, I stopped to catch my breath, my lungs burning, my mind racing. I looked around, desperate for any sign of help. but all I saw were the same dark houses, the same empty street. And then I heard it again, a creak, this time right behind me. I turned slowly, my heart in my throat. There, just a few feet away, stood the figure. It was no longer a shadow in the distance. It was right in front of me, its face hidden under a hood, its hand slowly reaching out toward me. Before I could scream, the streetlight above me flickered and went out. The last thing I heard was the door creaking open again.